Trump is telling a story. It's a pretty, he's tapping into pretty deep currents in American history and not good ones. What are we tapping into in response? And how can we use words? You can't do this in an op-ed. You can't. Speeches are distinct, and they are where we build a connection with an audience that can become a movement that can change things. And I think we're going to need that to get out of this.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Best People podcast. My guest this week is truly one of my favorite people. He's a familiar face to millions of Americans as he helps us on a near daily basis to make sense of Donald Trump's most dangerous moves on the world stage. Largely viewed as having a mind meld with former President Barack Obama, he's also one of the architects of some of the most successful and significant foreign policy achievements in recent history, notably the Obama administration's Iran nuclear deal. Now he is an author, a best-selling author, and the co-host of the podcast Pod Save the World, an indispensable guide to the great global unraveling that Donald Trump has unleashed. In his brand new book, All We Say, Ben looks at 15 important speeches in history in order to tackle one of the biggest, most enduring questions in American history and politics. What does it mean to be an American? So this is The Best People, and this is Ben Rose. Hi, my friend.
Hey, Nicole. I'm so excited to be doing this. It's so funny. We get to see each other in passing. So to have like some time to really chat with you I've been looking forward to this one.
What is it that you hold on to, and what made you write your first book really rooted in history?
Two things really led me to this book. The first is my last book was about authoritarianism, and I was looking at Trump, Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping in particular. And one of the things I was really struck by, and I learned in writing that book, is how central history is to authoritarianism. Basically, what autocrats do is that they rewrite history, and they make all of history a prequel to their ascent and their power. So Putin had to make the collapse of the Soviet Union a catastrophe that necessitated a strongman, in the same way that Trump has a kind of story about American history that all culminates in his election. He's here either to turn back the clock to some mythical past, make America great again, and or to essentially exalt a strongman who can solve all of America's problems. And so that led me to history. I'm not an historian, but as a speechwriter, I thought speeches could be a window through which to understand American history differently. And the other piece of it, Nicole, is it's possible, and maybe some of your listeners feel this tension, to give up on America, to kind of feel like all the things that we were taught feel like they weren't true, about the checks and balances of the government, about perhaps the kind of inevitability of progress in America, about the kind of virtue that was inherent. And I think I wanted to rediscover that the history of this country is far more difficult. But actually, the hope that you can find is when people, frankly, in even darker chapters than we're living through, stood up and changed this country for the better, Not in the present, because the present is so overwhelming, but in the past, kind of find the hope that we need in terms of how have people stood up and told stories, literally, to mobilize people, to start movements, to win elections that could change things. I think if we understand how people did that in the past, we are going to be better able to do it in the future.
I mean, the idea that words are just the best way to bend history, they're the only way. That's it. Everything else isn't politics. Violence isn't politics. It's something else. Um, just talk about the lost art of Americans being drawn to words.
So this is so central, Nicole, to what I hope people take away from the book. And I just actually get chills even thinking about it, because I'd say two things. The first is just try to imagine American history without speeches, without words. No Gettysburg Address, no I Have a Dream speech. If you're a conservative, Time for Choosing by Ronald Reagan. Words are where we adjudicate American identity. Now, I think part of what's happened is it's interesting to look at the evolution of speeches, which I do in this book. So at the beginning, Benjamin Franklin's the first speech. You're giving a speech for the people in the room, but also it's going to be reprinted in newspapers. And
Mhm.
so there were these kind of carefully crafted arguments. Then there was kind of a speaking circuit in the 19th century that emerged, and people like Frederick Douglass, they would travel the country and give the same speech over and over and over again hundreds of times, kind of like politicians give stump
Like
speeches.
a stump speech. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, or frankly, like a pop star, right, on tour,
Mhm,
because
mhm,
they were the pop stars of that time, and so
mhm,
that prized a degree of performance.
mhm.
Then radio comes along, and that a guy like FDR figures out, well, actually, plain spoken explanation is what is going to resonate on this medium. Then television comes along, and I have King and Kennedy in here, and television prior prizes spectacle and charisma, and crowds, right? Now, that brings us to today because the internet comes along, and basically we've lost the art of speaking to one another,
Yeah.
because now you get maybe a 90-second clip of a speech on your social media feed. And that clip is designed by the platform to trigger you, to either make you really angry at the other side or really affirmed in your own beliefs. And it's not a coincidence that since the rise of social media, which happened while I was in the White House, we've lost speeches. And it's no coincidence that Donald Trump has emerged to dominate this era because
Mm,
we no longer have a capacity to talk to one another and to stand up in front of a crowd and try to persuade them of something. Or our arguments are poor because we don't listen to other arguments, nor do we think in terms of a 30-minute presentation about what it means to be American or where this country's going. I was mindful of writing this book at a time when we've lost that, because I'm kind of thinking that that's the counter programming we need.
mhm.
You and I have both been political communication strategists. There's so much thought given to like the social media strategy and who can make kind of pithy videos and who can go on YouTube or podcasts. And that's all important. But if you don't know what your story is, all those other communications are not going to be as good. I mean, if you have a speech in which you can tell Americans what's going on, what you believe, why you care, and where you want to take this country. Not only I think is that what's missing in, say, democratic politics, like who's giving speeches. I mean, there's
Mhm.
some people like John Ossoff and who are doing better
I
at
keep
this. But
thinking, yeah.
yeah, but if you don't have that story straight, all the other communication is going to suffer too. And so I do think that we've lost this innate capacity. Because again, I worked for a guy, Barack Obama, who would never have been president without speeches. Ronald Reagan never would have been president without speeches, to the people in the book.
Mhm.
And I'd like people like that to come along and tell a story that we can all believe in again.
Well, I have 30,000 questions, but one of them is, are you able to diagnose if people stopped giving speeches or people stopped listening first? Like, is the listening the problem or the storytelling the problem?
At its best, if I look at in this book, I have, FDR's For Freedom speech, right? Or King's I Have a Dream speech. There's something symbiotic between the speaker and the listener, because the speaker respects the audience enough to tell them not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it. And frankly, also to not just give a 5-point plan, but to offer a sense of what this project of America is all about. I mean, FDR in his speech, he dismantles the isolationists. He makes the case for the Lend-Lease program so we can keep Great Britain in the war. And then at the end, he returns to an idea that occurred to him. Nicole, you'll love this as someone who worked in the White House. FDR gave a press conference at Hyde Park, which was going to be his presidential library in the spring of 1940. And it's one of these things where I read the transcript and the reporter asks him kind of what his national defense strategy is. And he kind of talks a bit about arms. But then at the end, he goes, actually, I think we know what the fascists stand for. I think we stand for four freedoms. And it was this kind of throwaway, freedom of speech and assembly, freedom to believe what you want, freedom from fear, freedom from want. And he drops it and he came back to it in that speech because he knew that the people listening, the people on the other end of the radio, not the people in Congress, They needed to know, what do we stand for in opposition to the fascists?
Mhm.
He was going to ask those people probably to fight in a war, and he needed to give them something to believe in that was bigger than a policy. It was these four freedoms that define American identity. And I think Roosevelt, like all these speakers in this book, for good or ill, defined America with his words. Like, we became a different country because of what he said.
Mm.
And to bring
Now I
it
have
back to your
chills.
question,
Yeah.
well, yeah, it's remarkable to
Yeah.
think that we've had leaders like that. And if you come to today, I think politicians, they believe they have to go to where the people are, which is a natural instinct. So I have to be on social media, I have to be on Instagram, I have to be on X, I have to go on, a podcast, because that seems to be where the young people are. And that's all true. But I think people would actually be receptive. I think that people, again, are ready for the kind of counter programming where someone stands up. And again, maybe the first time you give that speech, not that many people pay attention. But as you know from working on campaigns, the stump speech, the core argument can get
Mhm.
better,
Yeah.
crowd by crowd. And
Mhm.
you're seeing how the crowd reacts. There's something, again, symbiotic with the audience.
Mhm.
And if we have politicians and or movement leaders, for that matter, who can begin to tell stories that resonate, I actually think the audience will go to that. Democrats feel like they're in a laboratory cooking up talking points, with the latest focus group data, and tacking left or tacking center. And there's a question of, like, well, what's it all about, though? Like, Trump is telling a story. It's a pretty, he's tapping into pretty deep currents in American history, and not good ones. What are we tapping into in response? And how can we use words? Because again, you can't do this in an op-ed. You can't. Speeches are distinct, and they are where we, again, build a connection with an audience that can become a movement that can change things. And I think we're going to need that to get out of this.
Why does it still sound like Democrats, who now have 70 to 75% of the American public available to them, why do they still sound like they're cooking up talking points in a laboratory?
I should just say, part of this is you want a good messenger, and there are things I admire about Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris, as politicians. I don't think anyone would say that they are kind of first-rate storytellers. And so some of this is, you kind of just, it's great if you have a Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama come along, or Bill Clinton, or frankly George W. Bush gave some great speeches. But I think that the combination of living election cycle to election cycle and the news cycle, right, is so
Mhm.
dizzying
Mhm.
that you are constantly simultaneously reacting to Trump. He did something crazy yesterday. I have to talk about that, and kind of signaling a priority, like, oh, we have to defend Obamacare subsidies.
Mhm.
Um, and yet, and Nicole, I know you feel this, if you talk to anybody, whether it's your friends, people of different races or socioeconomic, whatever status in this country, actually, I think if you're small in your communication, you really turn people off, because right now, it's not just Trump. We've got artificial intelligence coming to
Mhm.
remake this economy. We are in wars, big wars, in Iran and Ukraine. There's a sense that the basic bargain of our economy doesn't work anymore. Like,
Mhm.
I can't afford anything, even though, I'm still doing my same job, and all of a sudden I can't afford anything. Um, Basically, to be blunt, like, capitalism's failing, foreign policy and the international order is collapsing, technology's coming for our jobs, and our kids are friends with chatbots. If you're not telling a big story, people are just gonna be like, these people don't get it,
Or if you're not
And
telling a true story, like
a
I
true,
think
yeah.
that because I think that's another thing that tangles up Democrats. And I had this conversation with Adam Kinzinger. Like sometimes anti-Trump Republicans are more evangelical in their support of the Democratic Party as the only vehicle that stands for the preservation of our democracy and thus our rights than Democrats. And it can be a small thing. I mean, it is indecent to attack the Pope. Nobody wants
Yeah.
that. Next
Yeah.
question. It is abhorrent to take planes and crypto and steal while the American families who do everything right are getting screwed in this economy. Next question. I mean, it feels like Democrats get tangled in the desire to be perfect, and they forget that they're the only ones in our politics right now on the ideological spectrum who are good.
Yeah. If I look at the common thread between the most successful, let's put aside Trump's second inaugural, which ends the book. But it's
This is one of the
important, I think, to
craziest things I've ever heard.
it is. It's important to sit with it though. But essentially, I have Obama, Reagan, Kennedy and King, Dolores Huerta, FDR, right? Um, these are people that weren't just telling a story. Sure, there was an opponent, there was an antagonist.
Mhm,
They were telling people why they believed in something and why they believed
mhm.
that it was worth fighting for certain things and why they believed the country had a capacity to change for the better. Now, I'll get myself into trouble here by picking on both the center left and the progressives. I don't want to be this critical, but I want them to succeed. I think the problem that people sometimes sense with the kind of centrist or Chuck Schumer kind of establishment of the Democratic Party is, again, these people don't get it. They sound kind of the same as they did 10 years ago. Like
Mhm,
they're
mhm.
trying to communicate about like healthcare policy when the whole country's falling apart and the Pope is being attacked and we're launching wars and why don't these people get it? And I think a guy like Chris Murphy kind of channels that energy in a good way. Like this is a five-alarm fire and we need to act we have to show up differently and sound different or else we're not credible because the best version of the old talking points is not good enough. Then on the progressive side, Obama used to do something, the speech in the book is the race speech. And um, you may remember this was in 2008 when his campaign was kind of existentially threatened by the emergence of all these videos of Reverend Wright, his pastor, not just his
Mhm.
pastor, the man who'd married him, baptized his children, kind of excoriating America for being a racist nation. I mean, frankly, saying things that were shocking in that time, but you know, like pretty normal after George Floyd. But that's a whole other story. But Obama gets up and he has to give a speech to literally save his campaign. I mean, it felt we were losing altitude, and the speech did that. And the most remarkable part of that speech is he speaks at length about the white working class. Not
Mhm,
he talks about black structural inequality, but then he says, white people the white working class does not feel like they've been particularly privileged by their race.
mhm.
And they're the ones whose kids had to get bused across town while the steel plants were getting shut down and they were losing their jobs. They're the ones, who um, were told that their concerns about crime are racist, and he inhabits and empathizes with the very people that he knows probably are not going to vote for him. And some of them may, but and the point I always make about Obama's communication that I learned from him, it wasn't the other way around, is that he didn't show up and say, "This is a racist country, and we need to own up to our racist past," or list any of the other flaws with America. He would say, "This country is so great that we've been able to change, and now we need to change again, and here's how we can do that." In other words, he invited people to be a part of remaking America for the better, not in a way that whitewashed our sins at all. I mean, he would name structural racism, he would name structural inequity, he would name corruption. But again, he invited people into. I mean, this is what the word progressive should mean: progress.
Right.
Like this country
And
is.
the
Yeah.
idea that it let's listen to that speech. I have some of it here.
This is where we are right now. It's a racial stalemate we've been stuck in for years. The profound mistake of Reverend Wright's sermons is not that he spoke about racism in our society. It's that he spoke as if our society was static, as if no progress had been made, as if this country, a country that has made it possible for one of his own members to run for the highest office in the land and build a coalition of white and black, Latino, Asian, rich, poor, young, and old, is still irrevocably bound to a tragic past. What we know, what we have seen, is that America can change. That is the true genius of this nation. What we have already achieved gives us hope, the audacity to hope for what we can and must achieve tomorrow.
There you go. I mean, I first of all, Nicole, it's kind of funny. I never figured. You know, I'm old enough now to realize how young Obama was because he's younger than I am now. When
He
he was
looks
doing that,
so young there. Yeah.
he does. But it's all his entire theory of politics is in that clip,
Hmm.
and it's
Hmm.
essentially. Notice he says there's nothing wrong with Reverend Wright calling out racism in this country, and actually that's part of the kind of prophetic black church that I write a lot about in the book. But the trap is to believe that this country is the worst version of itself and it's stuck there because there's a fatalism in that works kind of symbiotically with Trump, right? Like
Right. I
the
feel like that's
yeah.
Trump's bet, right? This felt so relevant rewatching it, and then I went and read the whole thing. Um, this is Trump's bet every news cycle, right? That the despair will have a paralytic effect on the 70% of Americans that don't approve of him. So they won't connect with each other. They won't believe what President Obama says there, that what we have already achieved gives us hope, the audacity to hope for what we can and must achieve tomorrow, that we can change, that we can get out of this. And I feel like that's as relevant literally today, this week, as when he gave that speech.
It is. I mean, a couple things that first of all, like I I start the book with Benjamin Franklin, and he gives the closing argument at the Constitutional Convention, and what's so interesting is he doesn't say a word about the Constitution. He speaks about the virtue of compromise,
Yeah.
and the point that's a great starting point for our history because compromise made the Union possible. But we were compromising about some pretty big things. I mean, slavery, who's a full citizen, immigration, all those questions were put off. And so basically, we've just been having a competition ever since of whose story are we the more progressive, and I don't mean like left. I mean like, are we a country that is aiming to
Forward.
become a more
Yeah.
perfect union, to
Hmm.
give more rights to more people and more opportunities? Or are we kind of the J.D. Vance version, which is like it's a heritage nation, it's kind of a white Christian nation. Other people can be here, but as long as they kind of accept their subordinate place here, and I think what Obama's doing, and first of all, just to tell a quick story, like um we the campaign's falling apart. He's like, I got to give the race speech. I put this off. Like we all knew at some point he was gonna have to speak at length about his race,
Hmm.
and so he said, let's do this. John Favreau, my fellow speechwriter, does a draft, and Obama stayed up the whole night. And you're used to be lucky if you got like some handwritten notes. He he wrote that the guts of that speech. Like he kept kind of the first few paragraphs and last few paragraphs. He literally in an all-nighter wrote the entire thing himself. And it was
Did
a
he write
crazy
it?
thing.
Right? How did he write speeches? Did he write them
So
out, or did he just?
this is what was so crazy and weird about it, is he used to write by longhand, and so what he would do is he'd take your draft and he'd on a pad he'd just write a few paragraphs and he'd point to where he wanted it inserted.
Mhm.
And actually, it was kind of nuts. He'd like you had to speak Obama because on page two he'd say A, and then there'd be a yellow legal pad insert A, and then this
Yeah.
meticulous handwriting, and then these line edits. And but in this case, Favreau's like, come over here and look at this. And I remember I come and look over his shoulder. And either because he was just going in a rush of inspiration and or because he was a middle-aged dad who didn't know how to deal with track changes, he had written in track changes. And so it was just picture like pages and pages of red track changes.
Lines. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm reading over Favreau's shoulder, like, this is where we are. It's a racial stalemate. And I'm like, I've never seen him say anything like this
Yeah.
personal, this visceral. And that's who he is entirely. He's simultaneously saying all these problems are real. The black community is absolutely right that civil rights legislation did not fix structural inequity in this country and housing and education and income and all these things. Reverend Wright is correct that in many ways this is a racist country, intentionally or not. But white working class people are absolutely right that they've been getting screwed, that they've not been advantaged, they don't feel advantaged by the race when their jobs get shipped overseas. Meanwhile, the rich people are fine. And he can name all that, but say like, and what's great about America is like we can make it better. Like the history that he situated himself in of the civil rights movement and the abolitionist movement and the suffrage movement of a country that doesn't despair, but says like, let's roll up our sleeves and build a coalition and go do something. And I think that ending the book on Reagan, Obama, Trump was fascinating to me because Reagan built a coalition with words. Obama built a coalition with words. The Reagan Democrats shifted back to Obama. Trump is the one who's more the disruptor because he's not trying to build a movement. He's trying to say the argument's over. I won, not we won. Not the Reagan Revolution won or the Obama
Hmm.
coalition won. I, Donald Trump, in taking custody of the American story. It's mine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so the 250th anniversary is going to be a party for me and an arch for me, and I will profit, and me and my cronies will loot essentially this country. And I'm very much in the Obama camp. I don't like a lot of Ronald Reagan's policies, but that's a healthy competition of stories. Note, and I point this out in the chapter, the Reagan speech I do is the Evil Empire speech, but it's to the National Association of Evangelicals.
Hmm.
And there's the coalition. It's Christian evangelicals, national security hawks, and free marketeers. He defended immigration, though. Like
Well,
Ronald
right,
Reagan, yeah.
in the Reagan Democrats are not yet part of the coalition, right? I mean, there's still more encroachment and building of the coalition after that moment. That's kind of as narrow as the political coalition is, I think.
That's right. But Reagan, just a incredibly interesting, complicated character. Because I think his legacy's been maimed by all sides, right? But at core, he was someone who wanted to believe in the conservative version of the story of American progress.
Mhm.
And so he was
Right.
consistently defending immigration. Like
Mhm. He does amnesty. So he's the last. So Bush thinks he can do amnesty, I think in small part at least. One, because he's from Texas and thinks it's the right thing, but two, because Reagan did it.
and Reagan in his farewell address talks about the city on a hill, and if it's a city if we have walls, we want to have doors in those walls. I mean, it's a beautiful line. I get chills just. Ronald, Donald Trump just building the wall with no doors.
It has
And
spikes. Like, I think Trump's
yeah,
wall
yeah.
is like got
He'd have a
spikes
moat if he could.
for the purpose of hurting people. I mean, I want to play JD Vance and then want to ask you
Yeah.
how the words became so sadistic between Pence and Vance. Here's Vance.
If you think about it, identifying America just with agreeing with the principles, let's say, of the Declaration of Independence, that's a definition that is way over-inclusive and under-inclusive at the same time. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, it would include hundreds of millions, maybe billions of foreign citizens who agree with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Must we admit all of them tomorrow? If you follow that logic of America as a purely creedal nation, America purely as an idea, that is where it would lead you. I think the people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War have a hell of a lot more claim over America than the people who say they don't belong.
I can't believe he said that.
Well, so our friend, our mutual friend Tim Miller, and I share the fact that line about the Civil War triggers us more than anything. However, I actually begin the whole book with that. The prologue begins with that speech, because actually I think it's the perfect distillation of what the kind of ideological underpinning is of Trump. And because it's like this nation is not a story. I mean, he says out
It's not an
loud,
idea. It's not a story.
it's not an idea. It's not a creed. And the creed that he's speaking about is all men are created equal.
Hmm.
He's saying we're not about that because that means anybody believes that could be. Well, I want to take issue with what J.D. Vance said very specifically, because in some ways my whole book is an answer to that. Because J.D. Vance's skill as a communicator is saying things as if they're obvious truths, but when you interrogate the truths, they tend to fall apart. So he says, we are not an idea. We're not a creed. We are a particular place with a particular people and a particular way of life. Okay, that sounds reasonable. Nicole, I'm talking to you from California. America is not a particular place. When it was founded, it was 13 states on the east
Right.
coast of this
Right.
country. California was a distant outpost of the Spanish Empire with some indigenous people living here. So
Right.
we've never been a place. If we were a
Correct.
place, we'd still be those 13 states.
Right. We'd be very
Second,
crowded.
well, that's the second point. We're a particular people. Are we? Because look at who the
Right.
people were in 1776. I could walk down the street here in Venice and see people from everywhere. Like
Mhm.
you know what that's coded for we're white Christian people,
Mhm.
right? And we're just not. Like look around. I mean, like this is a much more diverse place, and particular way of life. I mean, again, I'm in LA. I mean, I don't know how many ways of life are happening around me. I what I love about this country is it's a place where you're free to choose your own way of life. Not
Mhm.
not that like JD Vance tells you that
Mhm.
this is your way of life and we're not an idea. But where I give him credit though is that I for saying it out loud because and this gets back to Democrats like this is the fight. It's not just about like again healthcare subsidies or even corruption. It's like what are we? Like what is America? Like we need people to come along and engage in that argument because Abraham Lincoln, second inaugural, Frederick Douglass, like these are
Mhm.
people that were using words to tell Americans like who they are and it's not the JD Vance version of who we
Mhm.
are.
Well, what do you see that you like in terms of who's talking to the country in that way about who we are and who we can be?
So it's really interesting because I thought about this, and it's actually the younger Democrats.
Mhm.
John Ossoff
Mhm.
has a very compelling. I mean, he gives a good speech, which helps, um, and he's clearly studied my former boss as well as other people. But what I like about his speech that he's been giving is it's a coherent argument
Mhm.
about corruption. He indicts the corruption, but he says it's bigger than Trump. The whole system that we're living within has been corrupted, and fixing that corruption is how you get a government that will actually lower the prices and actually create opportunities and actually, support like affordable healthcare. Like he connects the what and the why. Like I actually feel like an era I was really interested in this book to do a populist because the populist, told these fire and brimstone stories about reform in the Gilded Age, and then that led to the progressive era. And in the progressive era at the beginning of the 20th century, what people understood is reforming government was part of getting better outcomes.
Mhm.
So if you have the direct election of senators and you have the women have the right to vote, it's more likely that you're going to get a government that looks out for workers and that cares about the rights of women and not just men. And then you get child labor laws. And then so what Ossoff is doing is he's saying if we reform how the system works, we'll get better outcomes. So it's not just like a pointy head message about corruption. It's like, hey, we need to fundamentally change how this government works to get better outcomes. And he tells it
Yeah.
as a coherent story. I just to throw two other people at you
Yeah, tell me.
quickly. James Tallarico
Yeah.
in Texas. He's telling people again the best. I thought about like what do the best speeches do? It's when someone again doesn't just tell you what they want to do, they tell you why they want to do it. And so
Mhm.
when Talarico talks about his faith and he talks about how that informs the way in which he thinks we need to care about one another and see one another, I know why he's in politics because of the story he's telling. And that's very powerful. And then the last one is AOC, who, it's not so much like she gives the best conventional speech on a teleprompter, but what she does bring is a kind of fearless and joyful um, uh, energy that uh, is necessary for movement building. The other thing I
Mhm.
thought about a lot in the speech is that you need to give, the best speakers build movements, and movements need to be unafraid of the powerful forces arrayed against them.
Mhm.
And frankly, movements need to be fun, Nicole. I mean, like, I
That's
don't,
right.
a MAGA rally is not my idea of fun, but those people look like they're having a good time. They got the hats and the weird
Mhm.
merch, and Trump gives a
Mhm.
stand up routine at a rally. Like, we've been kind of grim and angry. AOC looks like she's having a good time
Yeah.
taking people on. And so I think
Yeah.
if you look at Ossoff, Talarico, and AOC, there's a lot to learn from there.
What about Warnock? I feel like he's
Oh,
emerged
yeah.
as sort of the moral center, not just of the party, but of the country.
Absolutely. And actually, my King chapter, when you go back, Ebenezer Baptist Church, where King was a pastor, King's father was a pastor. That's Raphael Warnock's church.
Right.
And actually, I have a number of people in the book: an abolitionist, Maria Stewart, Dr. King, obviously, Frederick Douglass, all of whom emerged out of the Black church. And I think you can make an argument that no institution in this country has done more to hold America accountable to what it's supposed to be than the Black church. I mean, actually, the title of my book is Always Say. It's taken from a speech King gave the night before he was killed. He said, "All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper." And he's talking about that creed that J.D. Vance doesn't like, all men are
Mhm.
created equal. That leads me to Warnock, because Warnock, he brings uh, a moral perspective. Like if Talarico brings faith and and AOC brings fearlessness, and Ossoff brings kind of the intellectual heft. Um, when Warnock speaks, you can feel a moral outrage about
Mhm.
the injustice that is happening, but also the kind of redemptive idea that, I mean, I just find it inspiring that he went into politics. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
like that I'm not just going to sit here and give sermons about the nation's ills like Reverend Wright did. I'm going to simultaneously go to my pulpit every Sunday and then go to the Senate during the week, because I
Yeah.
think that this country is worth fighting for, but that we need a moral centering in our politics. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think he absolutely belongs on that list.
Um, Let me play a little bit of the I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
I feel like one of the things that's ailing is that this has always been either deeply felt or universally agreed to be the universally held aspiration. And if you're on the other side of that belief that all men are created equal, you were against progress, against equality. You were not lifted up and held up. Donald Trump and JD Vance have held up that sort of um, the antithesis of progress and equality and benevolence and growth and democracy, and laundered it in sort of the ashes of the political party I was once a part of. And I wonder what you do and how you talk to people that know that's wrong, to be part of a party that is now wrapped up in opposition of the belief that all men are created equal because they care about lower taxes.
I guess I'd say this. It was really interesting spending a lot of time with King for this book. What's interesting as a speechwriter is that when he wrote that speech with his speechwriters, and they literally finished it the night before in the Willard Hotel because they were hurried and didn't have a lot of time. He did not have the dream sequence in it, and this is going to be the answer to your question, Nicole, because actually someone told him, "Martin, don't use that thing you do about the dream." And I'd heard that he used to talk about a dream of a multiracial future, and I actually went back and read the other places where he did it, and it wasn't as powerful. It wasn't as vivid and visceral. And he gives the speech, and he kind of reaches this moment where he pauses. And reading about King, what I surmise is he knew he hadn't given the people enough. That this was actually the first time, and I didn't really inhabit this till I wrote this book. Most white people never watched a Black person deliver a whole speech, and all the networks cut in, we're going to take this. But even more than that, he knew that those people in the audience were going to go back and get physically beaten and imprisoned. Like he was going to be sending them back to the South. And he needed, just like FDR needed to give people the four freedoms, he needed to give them something to believe in. And as he's standing there, Mahalia Jackson, the gospel singer, who was someone that King used to call on the phone so she could sing him songs at night when he was really feeling down, she yells out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And it's one of these moments in American history where something else was at work. I mean, I believe in something, and it just comes out of him. No text, when you relive it and listen to it, every single image he puts forth is black and white coming together. Little black children and white children. He's just bringing the country together with his words. This is actually who we could be if we just get rid of this racism and inequality and hatred. And it's almost like he's levitating. And people at the time knew it. Like I read the contemporaries account, people in prison with tears streaming down their cheeks. Teddy Kennedy was on the dais and said, "I became a convert to the cause of civil rights that day." Like John F. Kennedy, King went to see him after that speech, and they'd had a complicated relationship. Kennedy greeted him and was like, "I have a dream," and gave a knowing smile, like one athlete to another. Like, "I see what you did there." And the reason it answers your question, Nicole, is we've been shaming people negatively. I do it all the time. So I'm counting myself. You do it too. We should. You know, shame on Jeff Bezos. Shame on Elon Musk. Shame on Republican members of Congress. What King understood, though, is sometimes a powerful, positive vision is more shameful than just speaking about the racism of Bull Connor. That, in other words, how can you listen to what King said and not want to believe that?
Does it still work? Can you still move people that way?
I think you can. And because actually, like there's something so remarkable about that. There's so many things, but one I want to point out, Nicole, which is we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident was an edit to the Declaration of Independence by Benjamin Franklin. The original version had a more religiosity, and I forget the exact phrase, but it had an allusion to righteousness or something. And Franklin's the one who changed Jefferson's sentence to self-evident, which is so powerful because it's just like it's self-evident that people are equal. It's Enlightenment rationality.
It's like, let's not get
Yeah.
mired in the debate. And now all we do is get mired in the debate.
Exactly. But think about this country. This country is so weird and wonderful that a black man in 1963 is standing on a dais in front of Lincoln, the Emancipation president, quoting a document written by a bunch of white men in the 1770s that says it is self-evident that people are equal. And that is our history. Like, that is our identity as Americans.
Yeah.
And frankly, like JD Vance and Donald Trump are an offense against that. And I think that, and you're right, like, okay, I want lower taxes, or, I want to keep my job in Congress, or I don't like those people. So, Donald Trump, at least he hates some of the same people I hate, and he owns the libs, or he's gonna, kick out somebody that I saw that's scary on Fox News who's brown. Like, what the hell is that? Like, that is not this country, like just endless. Well, actually, I have to say, it is this country, right? Like, and so precisely because it is part of this country too, we need to affirm the alternative story, that runs from, Franklin through King through, I'd like to think Obama, but plenty of other people too. This is not their country. It's not JD Vance and Donald Trump's country. Like, they're always going to be racist. They're like, Obama used to say this to me, like 30% of this country would have voted for George Wallace for president. So you can't presume like every single person is going to agree with like a different version of the story. But honestly, I do think that in addition to shaming people, you need to paint the dream picture for people.
Hmm.
Um, Give them that place to go. A lot of those oligarchs like fell for Obama. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's because he was winning, but I think they saw something they wanted to be part of that was good, whereas Donald Trump gives them something to be part of that is
Profitable. Yeah, lucrative. Um, it's such an important note. It's something I'm gonna take with me because I'm, obviously covering this $1.8 billion slush fund, and
yeah,
my reflex is shame on Todd Blanche for giving it the imprimatur of the mighty Department of Justice. Shame on the Republicans in Congress for not saying, I'm not going to give you another dime for your department until you say I won't give money payouts to violent insurrectionists who made me run for my own safety. I mean, you're right, and I'm wrong in terms of what moves people. So, how do you embody that in our politics and our media?
well, first of all, to give yourself a break, you kind of need both. I mean, actually, if you go back and you read the "I Have a Dream" speech, like King's pretty hard on the vicious racist, and there is a place for shame. There's a place for accountability. Like, absolutely. The point is, you need both. You need to prosecute the case and hold people accountable. And I saw what you were doing, Nicole, from the beginning, which is like, this is a person that believes in a different America. I don't even know all of your policy beliefs, but the core belief that this country is worth fighting for, and understands that there's going to be a necessity of like repetitive accountability and sanity. Like the one thing you see in every autocracy is people get overwhelmed by the mistruths. And if you use your platform every day to be like, no, you are not crazy. This is happening and it's wrong. And I don't care how many times I have to tell you, we're going to keep going back to it. That's really important. People need to have a tether to truth and accountability somewhere. I think that how we get it back in politics, though, is we actually have an opportunity precisely because Trump is not permanent and the sand is running through the hourglass here. Like maybe that's why the grift is getting bigger. He's just looting, like anything that's
Like
not
as
nailed
fast
down
as
in the
he
White
can.
House.
He's like
Yeah.
shoving.
He's just, yeah. And here's the opportunity. You know what's a really exciting question? What comes next?
Mhm.
What is America in the 2030s with AI and with no post World War II international order and with, demographics that are simultaneously becoming more non-white at the same time that the white people are kind of freaking out about that, or some of them are at least. Like, we need someone to tell us, like, yes, Trump bad. Like, yes, this corruption is endemic. The Ossoff message. It's actually someone to make people excited about the fact that, like,
Yeah.
hey, what's next? We're rebuilding the house. It's been burned down. This is not a renovation. This is a rebuild. And what is that going to look like?
I also think it's someone that's listening to everything that's been said or expressed by voters. Like, what I thought was interesting is how many of these speeches um, have their place in history and in the book because they were listening to something out there that they either wanted to lift up and be evangelical, not religious evangelical, but sort of spread. But none of it is detached from something that was out there, good and bad. And what I think the people who listen the best are actually our kids. Kids are listening to all of it. And I think kids have heard, and without sort of the partisan cages that maybe some of us find ourselves in our generation, but like the idea that what comes next will be better because they've listened to everything that's out there without a partisan lens seems like not only the most optimistic view of what happens next, but the most likely one.
That's right. Because kids, first of all, like, I do think there's something intangible lost and just the grown-ups have not been telling a good story, and
Correct.
how Trump talks to people. We've talked about how he treats women. Like that, there's an osmosis that's going to have to be. Someone's going to have to come along and restore a sense of character and personal decency. I think the other thing I'd add to it is kind of neighborliness. Like if you look at
Hmm.
Minneapolis,
Hmm.
none of those people were particularly powerful politically. I think that they changed the course of history, though,
Totally.
because they just were like, this is wrong. And we have no power, but we're just going to try to help our neighbors and each other. And the point is, what's hopeful about that is there are solutions actually that are
Hmm.
kind of not all one party or the other. They're just kind of
Hmm.
like where people are at, you know.
Hmm.
A good politician um, gets better as a speaker because he's listening or she's listening while they're out there on the trail. In the same way
Hmm.
that anyone building a movement, like King was listening to the people that he was trying to lead, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and Dolores Huerta, like, was going door to door to build a farm workers union and hearing what was on those people's minds. So that when she spoke for them, she was channeling their voice. And she actually has a great line that she delivered in Sacramento when they marched all the way from Delaware to Sacramento. She says, we embody our needs to you. Like, I'm here embodying the plight of basically people with no rights in this country, you know, who pick your fruit, and you got to pay attention to us, you know. And I think if people listen, if we've got 2 years where people can run for president on AI, on I mean, I wrote about Graham Plattner recently, or whatever you might think about his Reddit past. Like, he's like, I'm traveling around, like, I can't find anyone who supports this war. You know, and they're like,
Hmm.
why are we paying for this? Like, I think if you listen, and it doesn't mean that all their policies would align with me, but if someone just listened and had a moral center, had good character, like knew why they were in it, so they're not just malleable, but they take what they're hearing from people and reflect kind of where most people in this country are. I think the story that would emerge from that is quite powerful and would give us the answers to these questions about how do we deal with maybe these problems are not quite as hard to solve as the politicians tell us they are
Yeah.
because they tell us how hard they are to avoid having to try to solve them, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my last question is about a speech that isn't in here, but one that I love, and that's the way Bruce Springsteen opens his Land of Hope
Mm.
and Dreams tour, the prayer for the men and women in the military, and a really clear articulation of who we are and who we aren't. How important do you see culture and art?
I'm so glad. So I'm actually writing about this now for something, but I found that it was interesting to write about basically political storytelling, right? So everybody in this book is either a political leader, a movement leader, an activist. However, I actually, it was interesting reliving King and Kennedy, and there's part of me that I don't know how you've been about this, Nicole, but it's like, where's like the protest anthem? Like, where's the times they're
Mhm.
changing? Like, where?
I asked Joan Baez this, and she said this is the biggest difference, that this is worse because then they had each other, and she talks about standing up there. She calls him Martin. She says we had each other. I mean, she points that out as a difference between these times.
She and Dylan sang at the March on Washington before King. They were like on the undercard, you know? I mean, and I guess my plea would be this, and Bruce gets this, and a number of other people get this. I was talking to Brandy Carlisle about this recently, but is essentially it's not. I hate it when people are like, we need, we need our celebrities to post. You know, why doesn't Taylor Swift post more about politics on Instagram, or why doesn't I don't want them to post. I want them to make art that is
Mhm.
politically relevant, you know? And
Mhm.
look, not everybody has to do it, but we desperately need, we don't have a lot of shared cultural spaces. Music, film, like the kind of core American art forms. I'm not saying you have to like be, writing like a direct protest song like the streets of Minneapolis, like Bruce did, but you are operating in a context. And actually, if you want to speak to how people are feeling, and you don't have to write a song, Trump is bad, but you have to speak to how people are feeling, and people are feeling uneasy, and people are feeling afraid, and people like music is part of how we figure out how we're American too. Like Woody Guthrie to Bob Dylan to Public Enemy to Bruce Springsteen, like there's a thread, black and white and in between,
Mhm.
um, where we're actually not just protest music, but just music. It reimagines like a shared space that Americans can inhabit, and frankly, can reach people that politicians can't.
I think that's so right. And I think you know who knows that to be true is Trump. I think that's why the all-out war on late night.
Oh yeah, and stand-up comics are kind of they're public speakers too, by the way. I mean, like, you can deconstruct a Dave Chappelle, set. There's a lot going on there,
This is
and
that's another podcast.
but it's why Trump has, Kid Rock, and again, these
Yeah.
are terrible musicians, frankly, but he's creating an alternative cultural space that's MAGA.
It really is. It really should be the subject of our next lengthy conversation because I think there's something in there that unlocks your question about what comes next. I love getting to talk to you. I feel like I could have gone another 2 hours. The book is a gift to those of us sort of feeling our way through these moments. Thank you for writing it and for talking to us about it.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.